What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a bit of an opinion piece, really, about the effects of BG3, for better or worse, on the entire CRPG genre. Now, if you're familiar with my channel at all, I cover a lot of CRPGs. I will typically review a lot of different types of games, but CRPGs are definitely a specialty of mine. It is easily my favorite genre. I've also 100%ed and reviewed every single one of Larian Studios games, as well as the original Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, all of which you can find on my channel. But the point of this particular video is to talk about what I think are going to be the effects of BG3, regardless of whether it does good or bad. And we'll kind of talk about both instances, because regardless of what you think about BG3 or how it's going to do, quality, etc., what I want to talk about in this video is the effect it is going to have on the broader genre. And while there are some conversations that tend to surround BG3, chances are I've already talked about them. I've made pretty long videos about what I would like from BG3, etc., and I'll try to link those videos down below, but I don't really feel like rehashing those points here. So let's get on with it. Now, when it comes to CRPGs, they have pretty much been indie titles or AA titles. We have never really seen a proper AAA CRPG. To give some recent sales figures and compare BG3 to other very prominent CRPGs, Pathfinder: Wrath of the Righteous did very well for the genre that it is in. In its first week, it sold about 250,000 copies. I don't have total sales numbers, but I would guess by now, it's probably sold in the ballpark of maybe 1 million, which is honestly not insubstantial. However, you compare that to Baldur's Gate 3, which is an early access title that has not received a proper release, and its early access sales in its first week were already over 1 million. Now, some people might be thinking to themselves, those are just sales figures, not necessarily indicative of AA, AAA, etc. And fair enough, because that's true. Let's move that metric over to development costs. Now, I don't have exact figures here by any means, but given some information that we have, we can kind of extrapolate some numbers, for instance. And in the case of Wrath of the Righteous, we know that was a Kickstarter project that received about $2 million in funding from Kickstarter. Combine that with the fact that Wrath of the Righteous developer Owlcat Games employs somewhere between 30 and 60 people. Can't seem to get an exact number there by any means. And you have to pay all those people's salaries. And yeah, the development cost of Wrath of the Righteous was likely a few $1 million, if not approaching the double digits. And then we can make a couple estimates for Baldur's Gate 3 and its development cost. So from this, we know that Larian has been rapidly expanding. They're up to about 7 different studios. And again, while it's hard to verify the exact number of employees, it is estimated to be over 250. Combine that with the fact that the game has been in development for roughly 4 years, and BG3 is likely going to wind up in the development cost range of at least probably $100 million. And having that kind of money to throw at a project is really the difference between AA and AAA. Which is why I highlight all these numbers. Now, again, these are estimates. They vary wildly. Companies don't like to share specifics with all this kind of information all the time, especially when they are not publicly traded companies. So admittedly, a lot of this information is guesswork. But at the end of the day, this is a little boring. So why am I going over development costs and explaining how a lot of prior CRPGs were AA and BG3 is likely the first big AAA CRPG we've ever seen? Well, simply put, it's down to the implications of that. CRPGs, while they have often been well received and well loved, they are not really what you would consider a big AAA marketable title. They don't exactly pull in the numbers that these giant open world games tend to. And really all you have to do is do a tiny bit of research into sales figures of just about any massive popular open world game and then look at CRPG sales, and it definitely paints a picture, and probably none more so than Pillars of Eternity 2. Which is a fantastic game, but it took years for that game to turn a profit, despite it being a very well done CRPG. And like many CRPGs, I've also reviewed that one. You can go watch the review if you want my full thoughts on it. But yes, I think it's a great game. But with just a cursory amount of research, it is again very easy to see that CRPGs simply do not perform the sales numbers that would warrant throwing $100 million at them, which means BG3 is pretty much the first CRPG to do so. So it doesn't really take a mathematician to figure out that while CRPGs can be a much-loved, amazing series, that throwing $100 million at it would likely be a loss for most people. And then that brings us to BG3, which seems set to break that mold. Purely from a sales figure standpoint, it's pretty easy to summarize that if the game does well and sells enough to make a profit, other companies might look at that and be like, hey, maybe this genre is worth investing into. And if the game sells poorly, and even on full release doesn't see a much bigger spike in sales and kind of flounders and doesn't make its money back, then it will ultimately be something for, again, more publishers to point at and be like, even if you go out of your way to make this incredible game with all this money, it's just not a genre people want to pay for, which is kind of what they already kind of say, so here we are. So BG3, in my personal opinion, has ultimately become tied to the future of the genre in that way. However, up to this point, I have done very little in the way of talking about if that's good or bad, or if BG3 will be good or bad, so I'd like to take a minute at the end of the video here to talk about that as well. So first of all, what's good and bad is frankly subjective. I think most people are happy with the current state of early access, not necessarily content-wise, in terms of seeing more and more content be added, but what's in early access, I would say most people are pretty happy with, and the Steam early access reviews at least would back that up. However, in that same vein, there are people who will never be happy with what BG3 is. They don't like the direction it's going. They don't think it's true to the original titles. All conversations I've had on this channel before, again, not rehashing those, just pointing out that people will feel differently about this title. And I bring that up specifically to mention that just because a game and a genre gets more and more attention doesn't necessarily mean that attention is for the best. For instance, looking at, honestly, another genre altogether, World of Warcraft. That game has seen iteration after iteration, constant changes and improvements to the gameplay loop, core concepts even, and in many ways, the people who loved and touted that game for many years are leaving in droves lately. And you could argue that the mass appeal that World of Warcraft managed to obtain led to those changes, even if some of them were to the detriment of the title. So a more interesting conversation about BG3 being tied to the future of CRPGs is whether or not that turns out to be a good thing or not. Because often as genres and other forms of media, just in general, become more focused on appealing to the masses, oftentimes they can lose the core of what made them so good to begin with. So it is distinctly a possibility that BG3 releases, does insanely well sales-wise, has a super positive launch, etc., and that actually leads to the broadening of the genre, which generally speaking I'm a fan of. However, if at that same time that broadening then leads to the dumbing down of these CRPGs, in the name of accessibility, and then they start gutting core concepts that make it barely a CRPG anymore, then that itself could be a negative. But that's honestly just an opinion, and in a few ways kind of putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. But at the end of the day, I am not an oracle, I cannot see the future. However, it is very much so my opinion that Baldur's Gate 3 is tied to the future of what is going to happen with the CRPG genre. Because if it does incredibly well, it might very well inspire other publishers to start throwing AAA money at these games. And if it does poorly, it'll be another reason for them to say, clearly this genre isn't for mass market appeal. And if BG3 leads to that mass market appeal, we then have to ask ourselves, is that even a good thing as someone who loves the genre for what it is now? Is it possible that they will make changes that will make it no longer the genre that I hold so dear? At the end of the day, though, only time will tell, and as someone who loves video games and this genre, I'm looking forward to finding out either way. Hope you enjoyed my ranting and opinions about this. If you did, please drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Help me out with that YouTube algorithm. I review all sorts of games with a huge focus on RPGs, but again, CRPGs are my specialty, and I will be covering Baldur's Gate 3 more and more in the future. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.